Ralph, we're seeing this conference entitled Banks in Crisis. Is this a crisis or is it a transition?
Well, it's got to be a transition because we haven't really gotten out of the crisis we were in the first place. There's nothing new that's happened that's made it worse. We're still trying to recover from what we had before. And Joseph Ackerman, what he's saying is really governments lay off because we're not recovered. We still have some pain to go through. And basically, it's a self-serving statement. They're basically saying, you know, we can't deal with any more pain right now.
No, you say governments lay off. The amount of regulation going on at the moment is huge. Something else is the speed at which it's being implemented.
About 122 major regulations are coming into play with all the major banks around the world. We have never seen that many regulations come in within a 3-year period. Typically, regulations are put out and they're given 5, sometimes 10 years to actually implement. Why? Because they're very expensive and they're very disturbing to the bank. What we're trying to do is doing too much, too soon, and that puts a tremendous amount of risk in the financial services industry as well as the economy.
Now, something I know we've talked about before is this idea of the level playing field. Is the regulation the same across the board in each different country? Because, of course, if it's not, then you get all this kind of arbitrage where you go where the regulations are best.
The truth is, we only have one regulation that's really standard across board, and that's the Basel III regulations that are coming out. So that one's great. But every other one are all domestic in nature. So what we're going to see is banks arbitraging certain parts of their business. And I think the perfect example here is proprietary trading. It's out of the U.S. It's going into central locations. So we're going to have countries in the world that are going to have one line of business. And that's a huge amount of risk.
It is indeed. So big picture, where do you see the future of banking?
Well, I think the future is pretty clear. We're going to see 30% fewer bank brands within the next 5 years. We must see that. We have a massive oversupply of financial services products right now. And secondly, we're going to see retail banking pretty well die. Why? Because most people in retail are doing their banking at the grocery stores. They're doing it at their automotive companies. They're doing it at the electronic stores. They're not doing it at their bank branches. So we're going to see retail banking die. It's going to be mostly investment banking.
Okay, so 30% fewer, that's a big number. Where is it going to come from? Where are the weaker ones?
It's the non-diversified. You know, investors are very smart in this area. So you invest in very specific areas, diversify, diversify, diversify. The big diversified banks are the ones that are going to survive. I estimate that 80% of the world's wealth will be managed by about 15 banks within the next 10 to 15 years. And that's a huge consolidation. That's exactly the opposite of what the government wants. But investors rule here, not governments.
Indeed. And what do you expect the government then to do, or governments to do? Because this is exactly what they don't want to happen, isn't it?
That is exactly, but they want one of the 15. In fact, they want 2 or 3 or 4 of the 15. They want as many of those 15 banks to sit in their country as possible. So yes, they're going to talk about putting in regulations, but ultimately they're going to want these banks back. They're going to want these banks to be centrally located. And the reason for that is political. It's got nothing to do with money. It happened in the UK. When they had problems in Libya, what was the first thing the British government did? They took their money. That's why the banks are important to be in G8 countries, and that's why we're going to see focus in those areas. Now,
during the sovereign debt crisis, there's been more and more focus on banks. And in terms of your short-term concerns about how the European banks are dealing with the banking crisis, where do you stand on that?
I'm very, very concerned about their ability to access capital. I think that there's 5 to 10 banks in Europe that have no problems and that can survive, but the rest of them are all going to need additional funds. My concern is, where is that money going to come from in Europe? Because all the investors I talk to refuse to invest in small to medium-sized banks. They only want to invest in large ones. So where are they going to go for money? I suspect most of them are going to be forced into mergers with the large organizations. And that's why I suspect about 30% of the bank brands are going to disappear.
Indeed. Countries particularly like Spain.
Spain's my biggest concern.
Yeah.
My biggest concern without question, but Germany is also a concern because we have some large banks, but we have too many small banks. France is probably on the complete opposite side. They're the safest place to invest money, and they're very much like in Canada now. So where I'm investing in, very simply, I'm investing in Canadian banks, I'm investing in French banks, I'm investing in BNP Paribas, organizations like that, HSBC and JP Morgan. Everyone else, I'm standing back and seeing what's happening.
Okay, what about UK banks and where the UK banks are at the moment in terms of their taxpayer burden?
The only safe bank in the UK right now is HSBC. Barclays is doing fairly well, but they need additional capital, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to get it at a cheap price. The 2 government-owned banks, I absolutely have no idea what's going to happen to them because we don't need those banks. One of them may have to disappear just to make the industry viable, and that's a huge political question that I certainly can't answer right now.
It certainly is. Okay, Ralph Silva from the Silva Research Network. Thank you very much indeed.